Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of High Strangeness. As we regularly peer into the strange, weird, unknown, and mysterious cases that plague the world today, today's episode is no exception. Last episode we did something from the personal case file. This episode we're going to be tackling a more known and popular topic. Today's subject is a primal fear that's been in humanity since time immemorial. It's the fear of the dark, it's the fear of shadows, it's the fear of things you see in the night when a pile of clothing resembles a shape, or maybe there's a mass of shadows that it creates a form, and the longer you stare and the more you look, the more that form resembles something closer to something humanoid, or it seems realer than it did a moment ago, before you looked at it. We're talking about shadow people today. We're talking about more than that. We're talking about the legends, the myths, and the fear that revolve around us seeing things in the shadows. Obviously, we'll also be talking about sleep paralysis, as I think the two subjects go hand in hand. How much they go hand in hand might be a deeper subject, but I will cover the bases as much as I can, and we're going to dive into shadow people, the Hat Man, and sleep paralysis in today's episode. Here's High Strangeness, Episode 2, the Shadow People Phenomenon, the Hat Man, and sleep paralysis. Alright, let's talk about some history revolving the shadow people phenomenon. So, the shadow people phenomenon has been going on since recorded time, as far as I can tell. Even the ancient Sumerians, 5,000 years ago, they believed in something called the Alu, which is pretty much a shadow being that prowled the night and looked for sleeping victims to paralyze. In Arabic, Islamic mythology, they believe in jinn, You've probably heard of the Mara, or Mara. The goblinoid little demon creature in that popular painting sitting on the woman's chest as she's trying to sleep. It's kind of like a sleep paralysis depiction, pretty fitting. In ancient America, in the Americas, we have the Choctaw tribe. They had a legend about the Nalusa Chito and the Nalusa Philea, which are pretty much shadow beings that tormented lost children and hunters and things like that. We've been afraid of things in the shadow and had stories about them, since forever. The Hmong people even have a story about something called a pressure demon, which, ended up becoming the inspiration for Nightmare on Elm Street later on. So it's even infiltrated popular media as time went on. And we'll talk more about Freddy and Nightmare on Elm Street later, as it's relevant. And it's uncanny and strange how many of these stories resemble sleep paralysis. These creatures, they make us paralyzed. They suck our soul. They suck our energy. Things like this I can parallel quite easily to sleep paralysis. So that is very interesting. But even in modern day, we still hear stories about shadow people, and even more notoriously a being called, the Hat Man. And I have my own personal stories, which I'll go over a couple of them in today's episode, where, I've had these experiences as well, and maybe even some of you listening right now, you have your own experiences with shadow people or the Hat Man himself, and feel free to comment below and tell me your story, or send into the email below, and write me in if you want a more personal level discussion. But yeah, even as far back as 2002, in one of my favorite radio shows, Coast to Coast, they had a special episode on shadow people. Thousands of people called into that episode, and people were connecting with each other, and it was kind of crazy how similar all these stories were. And there was even a segment of the show where they started doing illustrations, and even the illustrations were very, very similar. So this phenomenon is something that's been going on since as long as recorded time, and it still continues today. So my family's home of many years was suspected of being haunted for a long period of time. We would see things quite often. Maybe this is a story for another time. Maybe we're kind of crossing stories here, but I think they're relevant because for some reason the shadow people and Hat Man phenomenon seems to be sometimes intertwined with hauntings, the haunting phenomenon, ghosts and phantasms and things like that. And also, strangely enough, it seems connected to the alien abduction phenomenon as well at other times. So it's kind of a crazy, fork in the road. You find yourself between or like an intersection between these three subjects. It's kind of crazy how much these stories seem to have similarities. For instance, before having an encounter with shadow people or the Hat Man, sometimes people will say there's like a humming noise they'll hear in bed, or even they'll have like a vibrational sensation, and sometimes these are connected to abduction cases and things like that. That same sort of sensation is sometimes connected. For me, growing up, and any experience I've ever had, and I'm sure a lot of people, it starts off as, you're just laying in bed, you're trying to sleep, you're trying to find your comfy spot, or whatever, and from the corner of your eye, or maybe you may even be just laying flat on your back, you're just scanning your room, the dark room, trying to rest your eyes and find some sort of peace. And in that moment, you notice a shape, something that you're like, hey, what the? Doesn't resemble anything I had prior to when the lights were on. What is this now? And for some of you, maybe this shape is more than just idle. Perhaps it's not just something still staring, which even in that, fits the description. But for some of you, even myself, I've had instances where these shapes move. If they had something you could call a neck and a head, I would have sworn I could see full motion of the neck and of the head. And these are the moments that usually would disturb me. Over time I've learned to form a sort of numbness against it, or maybe it's just not even caring, but we can get into that later. But yeah, normally it starts off as just shapes or something, that gains form. And if it starts moving, then, oh boy. I've even jumped out of bed and turned on the lights and it's nothing there sometimes, so it's really, it can really play with your mind at times. If you have the door open in your room, I find hallways, for some reason, you get that phenomenon known as peekers. I guess some people would call that, where you'll see the shape of a head or something, as though it's like peeking into the room, or maybe just hiding amongst the frame, like almost like trying to peek in, but kind of seem obscure, like almost solid snake-like, just kind of hugging against the doorway. Yes, anytime. And a lot of times I've had encounters where I've seen the Hat Man. He's usually super tall, like 6 foot or plus, you know what I mean? And he's usually prowling the doorways, the hallway doorways. And the last times I've seen him, it's been a situation like that. And because of that, my hyper anxiety and paranoia, I think I've slept with my doors shut for the past several years, just because I got fed up of, sleeping in bed and then, casually waking up and looking and seeing the bastard staring at me, or, So I simply don't anymore. And their presence can make it hard to sleep at times. The Hmong people call them pressure demons, or talk about a pressure demon, which I think is very fitting, because I think there's moments where these things do give off a sort of pressure, something very malevolent or disturbing, makes us afraid, causes fear. And I've learned to not be afraid, to resist temptations of fear. These things help. Like I said, I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights. One time you just get fed up, and I think that's probably generally an attitude you should have towards it more than fear, because fear will only make the situation worse for you, and it'll cause you discomfort, it'll cause you terror, things like that. So as frightening as it is, try your best to just stay of calm mind. It makes me wonder if there's something about doorways, which maybe I'll get into in the last section of the story today. But yeah, it's anytime I've had an encounter, it's just kind of been like that. And sometimes there's sleep paralysis, which comes with, you can't move your body. All you can do is move your eyes. If you definitely feel like you're being watched, or there's something there with you. There's been moments where I've been able to forcefully pull myself out of the paralysis and like maybe gain control of a hand. And with that hand, I've done, just use it I've put it in front of my face and kind of use it as a concentration tool, for myself to focus. Because I'm not sure what I'm dealing with. I'm not sure if this is my own mind, or if this is I'm getting some sort of spiritual attack, or this is some sort of psionic attack. You know what I mean? But I choose to fight back. And something that not maybe a lot of ufologists or people that are interested in the paranormal will admit to, or what we'll say, but and I'm not going to try to change the mood of the channel or anything, but invoking the name of Jesus Christ in these moments, it tends to help. It's kind of crazy. It almost like leans me towards like there's conspiracies about this being connected to demonology and things like that. I guess we'll get more into that later. But yeah, so I'd love to hear any of your guys' stories about shadow people. I'm sure there's many of you that have had encounters with the Hat Man or shadow people. But yeah, very frightening, very common. I myself have had numerous encounters. There was a moment when I was young where I even thought I made the Hat Man up myself, but it wasn't until I was older where I found out that no, it's not just me that's seeing this guy. It's people all over the world. Probably one of the most terrifying sleep paralysis stories I have is there's a night where I remember vividly. I was in deep sleep, having a disturbing dream, I'm sure, and I wake up abruptly, and I'm in sleep paralysis, and I can't move. I can barely even move my eyes, but I can feel as though there's something laying next to me. I can even almost feel the indenture in the bed of weight, like of another form being there, but I can't move. And with every ounce of strength, and because I really want to see what the heck this thing is, like it's almost like taunting me that I know it's there, but I'm stuck, so I can't see, So with all my strength, I force myself to swivel my body, to turn to my side so I could see, which I probably should have never, and I don't know why I did, but as soon as I was able to turn over and look to see, was the most terrifying, the most grotesque, the most indescribable face that I've ever seen grinning back at me, laying with me in full form. For the longest time I thought it was the devil himself, but the more I think about it, I guess it was something closer to like maybe a witch. The scariest part about that experience is when I turned over to see that horrifying face, and I was just stuck in the most intense fear of my life. I woke up again for a second time. It was like a sleep within a sleep, and of course there's nothing there, and it's morning. But yeah, it's that in that dream. I don't know what the heck that was. It was almost like it was sleep paralysis within a dream, if that's even possible. That's what makes it even more confusing. Like, was I really in sleep paralysis? I had a real incident, and then I blanked, the fear knocked me out, and I went back to sleep again, and then I woke up again. Who knows what it was? But yeah, that was the scare. I can almost see it in my face, but it's almost like so frightening my mind wants to block it out. But yeah, I guess if I had to say it was something, I would say it was something that looked like, a generic hag or like a witch. Alright, so is there a reasonable scientific explanation for all of this? Well, the closest thing that we could find to explain all of this is, the thing that's been connecting to all these stories this entire time: sleep paralysis. Um, when your body is trying to relax and enter that deep sleep mode, your brain turns off your voluntary muscle movement to keep you safe. It's called hypnagogia. It's when you're going from that fully awake mode to that sleep mode. It does this so that you're not flailing around in your sleep. And then when you go from that mode back to being awake, that's called hypnopompia. Um, that's when your muscles return back to you and you're able to move again. Sometimes in between those stages, your brain can get mixed up and you can enter sleep paralysis. And in these moments, your eyes may move, if that, but you can't move your body. And it's in these moments that we're afraid, we feel fear, it's dark, we were just dreaming. There's sometimes that in these moments, the things that we were dreaming might seem realer than real, and you have a delusion, a hallucination. They're called hypnagogic hallucinations. You might have one right in front of you. It might be visual and audio. You might hear and see it. You know what I mean? So this is a real thing. This happens. So I think a lot of the sleep paralysis terror incidents are probably associated to that. Um, there's another thing where our peripheral vision, it tends to fill in a lot of information. When you look through your peripheral, you can only see so much. So your brain is going to fill in the rest. So if you think you see something from the corner of your eye, or you think you see something, and if your brain's going to fill in the most. You've probably had a situation where you even thought you saw something from the corner of your eye. You turn around to look, and it's not there. Your brain just thought it saw something. It did the liberty, and it filled in the rest for you. You turned in, guess what? It's not there. Your brain played a trick on you. So it's very strange and interesting how our brain can do this to us. There's another speculation where very low frequencies of VLF and ULF will cause hallucinations and dread with very low light frequencies with humans and animals. So this is another theory as to what could be going on. I once saw a documentary um, on YouTube where pretty much a psychologist was explaining the reasoning behind the Hat Man and shadow people. Um, it seemed like it was probably from like the 90s or 80s. If I can dig up and find it, I'll have it playing along with the audio. If not, just bear with me. But basically, he was attributing the fact to these with the boogeyman. You know what I'm saying? Like the things that we're afraid of the dark, and he even mentioned Freddy Krueger and Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's popular in the media, so it's in all of our heads. So who do we all see when we think of the boogeyman? We think of Freddy Krueger. Um, And I thought that was interesting until, I discovered that Wes Craven actually got the inspiration for Nightmare on Elm Street from a story from the Laos War. The Hmong people, they talk about the pressure demon. Freddy Krueger was inspired from a pressure demon. So no, we're not all just seeing Freddy Krueger because he was the popular mainstream boogeyman of the time. Um, it was inspired prior. There's some pretty crazy conspiracies and theories about shadow people and the Hat Man. I've heard all sorts of explanations. Um, I've even heard that they're interdimensional travelers. Maybe we occupy a lot of the same space as perhaps other, if you know how the two slit experiment works and how light works and how it's basically blipping in and out of reality, at all times. It's possible that, where does that matter go when it's not here, when it's blipping somewhere else? Well, maybe it's somewhere else. So, it's possible that maybe there's other realities or other dimensions interfering with the same space that we use, but we're simply unable to see them. We're simply unable to interact with them. So perhaps these shadow people, or the Hat Man, or maybe they're interdimensional beings. They're just occupying the same space as us, and for some reason, we only see them, during these certain stipulated times. I've heard people connect this phenomenon to ghosts, phantasms, specters, and things like that, just because things that are connected to hauntings, the lights flickering and seeing things, the TV's going off and on. Sorts of these strange phenomena are sometimes connected with sightings of shadow people and the Hat Man. I've also heard of it being attributed to the UAP UFO alien phenomenon. I've heard people say that perhaps the shadow people or the Hat Man are simply extraterrestrials observing humanity. They're perhaps using cloaking or stealth device technology to hide themselves. Which recently I've seen an updated video on the Las Vegas alien sighting of last year. On News Nation, they did a report where they were saying that the footage was original. And if you look at it does look like there's something blurry behind that fence, and even the head looks like something blurry. And I'll probably do an episode on that later as well. But even something like that, it's almost like it almost pays credence to the whole aliens using stealth tech to observe us. Pretty scary to think about as a possibility. Yeah, I've heard that one as well. I've heard about the shadow people and the Hat Man being connected to demonology. They're demons. They're spawns of hell. They're trying to siphon our soul. They're trying to cause fear within us. They're trying to weaken us. Things like that. They're preying on us. They're preying on humanity. They might be these eternal demonic things that are bound, and maybe the whole process of, me seeing them within doorways and things like that, maybe that has to do with the magical property behind it. Also, I've heard, there's things about, doorways that have properties, that you can form seals and barriers or gateways through doors. So, that's going super tin hat foil mode, but I've heard that explanation as well. In closing, I think it's a phenomenon that we'll never truly be able to explain, whether it's a delusion created from our minds, a process of human biology, a product of a hallucination that we're all tied to. It could be something like that, or it could be something else. It could be something that is, older than time itself. It could be something that we simply don't understand. Is something that maybe we will grow to understand later. I've seen things fully awake. I've seen things with the lights on. I've seen something that looked like a cat run past me. You know what I mean? So I can't, I can't fully explain some of these weird phenomenon, but I do think science does explain a lot of it. But I do think a lot of it is left unexplained to, the paranormal. All right, everyone. I think that closes up another episode for today. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have any incidents with Shadow People or the Hat Man and you want to share them, go ahead and comment or email me at High Strangeness below. I'd love to hear your story. All right, well, stay safe, take care, because you never know when you might be caught up in the next case of High Strangeness. See ya.